She looked at the old man in his worn cardigan and faded khakis, and her mind was already made up. No way this homeless-looking guy belonged in first class. What she didn't know was that in exactly 47 minutes her career would be over, and the entire cabin would rise to their feet for the man she was about to humiliate. Flight 147 was boarding at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, and flight attendant Monica Castellanos was having the kind of day where everything felt like a personal insult. The coffee machine was broken. 2 passengers had already complained about the temperature, and now this, an elderly man shuffling toward first class like he owned the place. Harold Thompson didn't look like the typical first-class passenger. At A2 he moved slowly, his weathered hands gripping a small carry-on bag that had seen better days. His brown cardigan was clean but showed its age, and his khakis were the kind you'd find at a discount store, not a luxury boutique. To Monica, he looked exactly like the kind of person who tried to sneak into premium seats when no one was watching. "Excuse me, sir," Monica said, stepping directly into the aisle to block his path. Her voice carried the authority of someone used to maintaining order. "This is first class. I think you're looking for economy." Harold looked up with patient eyes that had seen more than most people could imagine. "Actually, I'm looking for seat 2A, he said quietly, holding up his boarding pass. Monica glanced at the boarding pass, but her expression remained skeptical. Something about this didn't add up. The seat was legitimate, but this old man clearly didn't belong here. In her 3 years with the airline, she'd developed what she considered a reliable radar for passengers who didn't fit. "Sir, there must be some confusion," Monica said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "These first-class tickets cost over $3,000. Are you sure this is your correct seat?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Harold understood exactly what she was implying, that someone like him couldn't possibly afford to be where he was standing. "My granddaughter purchased this ticket for me," Harold explained with the same quiet dignity he'd maintained throughout his age. "It was a birthday gift so I could visit her comfortably." Monica wasn't convinced. She'd heard every excuse from passengers trying to upgrade themselves without paying. The sob story about the granddaughter, the mention of his age, the humble appearance, it all seemed calculated to generate sympathy. "I'm going to need you to step aside while I verify this," Monica announced. "If there's been some kind of mistake or situation, we need to sort it out before takeoff." Harold felt a familiar weight settle in his chest. He'd experienced this before. The suspicious looks, the assumption that he didn't belong, the immediate judgment based on his appearance. At his age, he'd hoped to be past caring about such things, but it still stung. What Monica Castellanos didn't know, as she questioned Harold's legitimacy in front of the first-class cabin, was that the man standing before her had spent 25 years serving his country. She didn't know about the 2 tours in Vietnam, the Bronze Star for Valor, or the leadership commendations from his time as a sergeant first class in the United States Army. She couldn't see the invisible uniform he still wore with pride, or understand that the modest clothing and careful movements came not from poverty, but from a lifetime of valuing substance over style. Harold Thompson had learned long ago that real worth wasn't measured by the price of your clothes or the brand of your luggage. But Monica saw only what was in front of her. An old man who didn't look like he belonged in first class, and she was determined to do something about it. "Sir, I need you to move to economy immediately," Monica said, her voice now carrying an edge that made several passengers turn to watch. "I can't have you disrupting the first-class cabin until we verify your ticket status." "I understand your concern," Harold replied, his military training evident in his calm response to confrontation. "But I assure you this ticket is legitimate. If you'd like to call the gate—" "What I'd like," Monica interrupted, "is for you to take your real seat so we can proceed with boarding. If you refuse to comply, I'll have to call security." The threat of security was the final straw for several first-class passengers who had been watching this exchange with growing discomfort. Some shifted in their seats, others whispered among themselves, but none spoke up for the elderly man being humiliated in their presence. Harold stood there, knowing that any argument would only make things worse. He'd faced much worse situations than this in his life, and he'd learned that sometimes the best response was simply to endure with dignity. What none of them knew was that Captain Michael Rodriguez, a 25-year Air Force veteran, was making his way through the cabin for his pre-flight passenger walkthrough. And what was about to happen would change everything. The captain appeared in the first-class doorway just as Monica was making her final demand for Harold to move to economy. Captain Rodriguez took one look at the scene, an elderly man being confronted by his flight attendant, while other passengers watched in uncomfortable silence, and every instinct from his military background told him something was very wrong. "Is there a problem here?" Captain Rodriguez asked, his pilot's uniform immediately commanding attention from everyone in the vicinity. Monica turned with obvious relief, clearly expecting support from the aircraft's captain. "Captain, we have a passenger who claims to have a first-class ticket, but there are serious questions about its legitimacy." Captain Rodriguez looked at Harold, and something in the elderly man's bearing immediately caught his attention. It was the way Harold stood despite the humiliation, straight back, dignified, with the kind of quiet strength that the captain recognized from his own military service. "What makes you question the ticket's legitimacy?" Captain Rodriguez asked. Monica gestured toward Harold, as if his appearance alone was evidence. "Well, look at him. Does he really look like someone who can afford a $3,000 first-class ticket?" The captain felt a familiar anger rise in his chest. He'd heard this kind of judgment before, and it never failed to disgust him. During his military career, he'd served alongside heroes who came from every background, every economic level, and every walk of life. He'd learned that courage and character couldn't be measured by someone's wardrobe. "Ma'am," Captain Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of command, "a passenger's appearance is not grounds for questioning the legitimacy of their ticket." Monica's face flushed, but she wasn't backing down. "Captain, with all due respect, common sense tells us." "Common sense," Captain Rodriguez interrupted, his tone growing colder, "tells us to treat every passenger with dignity and respect, regardless of their age or appearance." The first-class cabin had fallen completely silent. Every passenger was watching this confrontation unfold, some with growing discomfort at Monica's behavior. Harold watched this exchange with a mixture of surprise and growing hope. For the first time since arriving at the airport, someone in authority was defending his right to be treated fairly. "Sir," Captain Rodriguez said, turning to Harold, "may I see your boarding pass?" Harold handed over the document. Captain Rodriguez examined it carefully, and his expression made it clear that everything was in perfect order. "This ticket is completely legitimate," Captain Rodriguez announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sir, please take your assigned seat with my apologies for this unnecessary delay." But the captain wasn't finished. As Harold slowly made his way to seat 2A, Captain Rodriguez turned back to Monica. "Miss Castellanos," he said, reading her name tag, "your behavior toward this passenger has been completely unacceptable." Monica opened her mouth to protest, but Captain Rodriguez held up his hand for silence. "You questioned this gentleman's legitimacy based solely on his appearance. You threatened him with security removal and humiliated him in front of other passengers. That kind of discrimination has no place on my aircraft." "Captain," Monica said, her voice shaking, "I was just doing my job." "Your job," Captain Rodriguez cut her off, "is to ensure the safety and comfort of all passengers, not to make assumptions about their worthiness." Captain Rodriguez reached for his radio. "Ground crew, this is Captain Rodriguez. I need security personnel to board the aircraft immediately. We have a crew member who needs to be removed from this flight." The cabin erupted in shocked murmurs. Monica's eyes widened in disbelief. "Captain, you can't be serious. Over this old man? Over treating a paying passenger with basic human decency?" Captain Rodriguez replied. "Yes, I'm absolutely serious." Within minutes, 2 airport security officers boarded the aircraft. As they approached Monica, the entire first-class cabin watched in stunned silence as she was escorted off the plane, her airline career effectively over. As the aircraft door closed, Captain Rodriguez turned his attention back to Harold. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Rodriguez announced to the entire first-class cabin, "I want to address what just happened here." The cabin fell silent, every passenger hanging on the captain's words. "What you witnessed was discrimination, pure and simple. A passenger was judged and humiliated based on his appearance and age. That's not just unacceptable, it's un-American." Harold looked up at the captain with growing amazement. This gentleman, Captain Rodriguez continued, gesturing toward Harold, was threatened with removal from a seat he had legitimately purchased and treated with disrespect that should shame every one of us who witnessed it. What many of you may not realize, the captain continued, is that this man carries himself with a bearing that I recognize. The patience he showed, the dignity with which he responded to false accusations, these are the qualities of someone who has served. Harold felt his breath catch. How had this stranger seen what others had missed? Sir, Captain Rodriguez said, addressing Harold directly. Were you in the military? Harold nodded slowly, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, sir. United States Army. 25 years of service. A gasp went through the first-class cabin. Suddenly, the elderly man in the simple cardigan took on an entirely different significance. 25 years, Captain Rodriguez repeated, his voice filled with reverence. What was your rank when you retired, sir? Sergeant First Class, Harold replied, his voice growing stronger. Captain Rodriguez felt his throat tighten. He knew what that meant. A quarter-century of enlisted leadership, combat experience this elderly man would never boast about, but would carry forever. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Rodriguez announced, we have the honor of flying today with Sergeant First Class Harold Thompson, United States Army, retired. A man who dedicated 25 years of his life to serving our country. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every passenger in first class rose to their feet, applauding with genuine enthusiasm. The sound was thunderous, and several passengers had tears in their eyes. Harold stood slowly, overwhelmed by this unexpected recognition. This moment, this spontaneous outpouring of appreciation from complete strangers touched him more deeply than any medal ever had. Sergeant Thompson, Captain Rodriguez continued, on behalf of this airline and every American who understands the debt we owe to veterans, I apologize for the shameful treatment you received today. Harold felt tears streaming down his cheeks now. Your service matters, Captain Rodriguez said. Your sacrifice is remembered, and you deserve to be treated with the highest level of respect wherever you go. The applause seemed to go on forever. Passengers who had watched Harold's humiliation in silence were now on their feet, clapping for the reminder of what decent behavior looked like. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Harold settled into his first-class seat with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. Captain Rodriguez stopped by Harold's seat one final time before takeoff. Sergeant Thompson, he said quietly, I'm a veteran myself. Air Force 3 tours in Afghanistan. What happened to you today was wrong. But I want you to know that there are still people who remember and will always stand up for those who served. Harold shook the captain's hand firmly. Thank you, Captain. Your parents raised you right. My father is still alive, Captain Rodriguez said with a smile. He's a Vietnam veteran, just like you. And yes, I hope he'd be proud of what I did today. As Flight 8047 lifted off from Dallas and climbed into the sky, Harold gazed out the window and reflected on the morning's event. The humiliation had been painful, but Captain Rodriguez's response had restored his faith in humanity. When the plane touched down in Seattle, Harold was greeted by his granddaughter Sarah, who had been waiting anxiously after receiving a call about the incident. Grandpa, Sarah said, hugging him tightly, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry. Harold hugged her back. Don't worry about it, sweetheart. Sometimes life tests us to see what we're made of. Today, I learned that there are still good people willing to stand up for what's right. The story of Flight 847 spread rapidly through social media. Captain Rodriguez was commended by the airline for his moral courage, while the incident sparked new training programs focused on treating all passengers with dignity. Monica Castellanos was terminated and found it difficult to secure employment in the airline industry after word of her behavior spread. Harold Thompson returned home with more than just memories of his visit. He carried with him the renewed knowledge that respect and honor still mattered, and that sometimes, when you least expect it, a hero will remind everyone what true leadership looks like. The incident became a powerful reminder that we should never judge people by their appearance or age. It demonstrated that respect is earned through character, not wealth or status. Harold Thompson's story reminds us that heroes come in many forms. Sometimes they wear military uniforms, sometimes pilot uniforms, and sometimes just simple cardigan. But they all share the same commitment to doing what's right. In the end, Seat 2A was just a place to sit. But the first-class treatment Harold received from Captain Rodriguez was a gift that would last him for the rest of his life. "Ma'am," Captain Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command, "a passenger's appearance is not grounds for questioning their legitimacy." "But Captain," Monica protested, "common sense tells us." "Common sense," Captain Rodriguez interrupted, "tells us that we should treat every passenger with respect and dignity, regardless of how they look or how old they are." Harold watched this exchange with growing amazement. For the first time since he had arrived at the airport, someone in authority was standing up for him, defending his right to be treated fairly. Captain Rodriguez turned to Harold. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Harold handed over the document, and Captain Rodriguez examined it carefully. The ticket was legitimate, properly issued, and clearly indicated Seat 2A in first class. "This ticket is perfectly valid," Captain Rodriguez announced, loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. "Sir, please take your assigned seat." Monica's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. "Captain, I was just trying to—" "You were making assumptions based on this gentleman's appearance," Captain Rodriguez said firmly. "That's not acceptable behavior from any member of this crew." Harold slowly made his way to Seat 2A, his arthritic joints aching from the stress and prolonged standing. As he settled into the comfortable leather seat, he felt a mixture of relief and lingering humiliation from the ordeal. But Captain Rodriguez wasn't finished. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain said, addressing the entire first-class cabin, "I want to take a moment to address what just happened here." The cabin fell silent, with every passenger turning their attention to the captain. "This gentleman," Captain Rodriguez continued, gesturing toward Harold, "was questioned and humiliated based solely on his appearance and age. He was accused of fraud, threatened with removal from the aircraft, and treated with a level of disrespect that should never happen to any passenger, but especially not to someone of his generation." Monica shifted uncomfortably, clearly hoping the captain would end his speech and allow the incident to be forgotten. "What many of you don't understand," Captain Rodriguez continued, "is that this man's generation made sacrifices that allow us to live in freedom today. They served in wars, worked in factories, built the infrastructure of our country, and earned the right to be treated with dignity and respect." Harold looked up in surprise as the captain's words washed over him. He hadn't expected this level of defense from a stranger, and he felt tears beginning to form in his eyes. "Furthermore," Captain Rodriguez said, his voice growing stronger, "I recognize something in this gentleman that many of you missed. The way he carries himself, the patience he showed during this unfair treatment, the dignity with which he responded to accusations. These are the qualities of someone who has served." The captain turned directly to Harold. "Sir, were you in the military?" Harold nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. Army. Served from 1960 to 1985. A murmur ran through the first-class cabin as passengers began to understand the full scope of what had just occurred. 25 years of service," Captain Rodriguez said, his voice carrying a reverence that made several passengers shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Vietnam era through the Cold War?" "Sir, what was your rank when you retired?" "Sergeant First Class," Harold replied quietly. Captain Rodriguez felt his throat tighten. He knew what that meant. 25 years of enlisted service, multiple deployments, leadership responsibilities, and likely combat experience that this elderly man would never talk about, but would carry with him for the rest of his life. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Rodriguez announced, "we have the honor of flying with Sergeant First Class Harold Thompson, United States Army, retired. A man who spent 25 years serving our country so that all of us could enjoy the freedoms we have today." The first-class cabin erupted in spontaneous applause. Passengers who had watched Harold's humiliation in silence just minutes earlier were now clapping and cheering, their attitudes completely transformed by this revelation. But Captain Rodriguez wasn't finished delivering justice. He turned to Monica, who was standing frozen in the aisle, her face pale with the realization of what she had done. "Ms. Castellanos," Captain Rodriguez said, his voice now cold and official. "Your behavior towards Sergeant Thompson was completely unacceptable. You questioned his legitimacy based on his appearance, threatened him with security, and attempted to force him out of a seat he had legitimately purchased." Monica opened her mouth to speak, but Captain Rodriguez held up his hand. "More importantly," he continued, "you showed profound disrespect to a military veteran who gave 25 years of his life in service to this country. That level of judgment and prejudice has no place on my aircraft or in this airline." The captain reached for his phone and made a call that everyone in first class could hear. "Ground crew, this is Captain Rodriguez. I need security to board the aircraft immediately. We have a crew member who needs to be removed from this flight." Monica's eyes widened in shock. "Captain, you can't be serious. I was just doing my job." "Your job," Captain Rodriguez said firmly, "is to ensure the safety and comfort of all passengers, not to make assumptions about their worthiness based on their appearance." Within minutes, 2 security officers boarded the aircraft. Captain Rodriguez spoke with them briefly, and Monica Castellanos was escorted off the plane, her airline career effectively ended by her prejudice and poor judgment. The entire first-class cabin watched in stunned silence as the flight attendant who had humiliated a military veteran was removed from the aircraft. As the security officers and Monica disappeared down the jet bridge, Captain Rodriguez made one final announcement. "Sergeant Thompson," he said, "on behalf of this airline, this crew, and every American who understands the debt we owe to veterans, I apologize for the treatment you received today. It was unacceptable, and it will not happen again on my watch." Harold felt tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. In all his years, through all the discrimination and disrespect he had occasionally faced, he had never experienced such a powerful moment of vindication and honor. "Furthermore," Captain Rodriguez continued, "I want you to know that your service matters, your sacrifice is remembered, and you deserve to be treated with the highest level of respect wherever you go." The applause that followed was thunderous, with every passenger in first class rising to their feet to honor the elderly veteran who had been so badly mistreated just minutes earlier. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Harold settled back into his first-class seat with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. The comfortable leather seat, the extra legroom, and the attentive service from the replacement flight attendant were all wonderful. But what meant the most to him was the reminder that there were still people in the world who understood the value of respect and the importance of standing up for what was right. Captain Rodriguez stopped by Harold's seat one more time before takeoff. "Sergeant Thompson," he said quietly, "I'm a veteran myself. Air Force, 3 tours in Afghanistan. What happened to you today was wrong. But I want you to know that there are still people who remember, who care, and who will always stand up for those who serve." Harold reached out and shook the captain's hand. "Thank you, Captain. Your father would be proud of the man you've become." "Actually," Captain Rodriguez said with a smile, "my father is still alive. He's a Vietnam veteran, just like you. And you're right. I hope he would be proud." As Flight 8047 lifted off from Dallas and climbed into the afternoon sky, Harold Thompson looked out the window at the landscape below and reflected on the day's events. The humiliation had been painful, but the response from Captain Rodriguez had restored his faith in humanity. The flight to Seattle was smooth and comfortable, with Harold enjoying every moment of the first-class service his granddaughter had so thoughtfully provided. But more than the luxury, he treasured the memory of a young captain who had risked his career to defend an elderly veteran's dignity. When the plane landed in Seattle, Harold was among the first passengers to disembark. As he walked slowly up the jet bridge, he was greeted by his granddaughter Sarah, who had been waiting anxiously after receiving a call from the airline about the incident. "Grandpa," Sarah said, hugging him tightly, "I heard what happened. I'm so sorry you had to go through that." Harold hugged her back and smiled. "Don't worry about it, sweetheart. Sometimes the world tests us to see what we're made of. Today, I learned that there are still good people willing to stand up for what's right." The story of Flight 847 spread quickly through social media and news outlets. Captain Rodriguez was commended by the airline for his leadership and integrity, while the incident led to new training programs focused on treating all passengers with dignity and respect. Monica Castellanos was terminated from her position and struggled to find work in the airline industry after word of her behavior spread throughout the aviation community. Harold Thompson returned home with more than just memories of a visit with his granddaughter. He carried with him the knowledge that respect and honor still mattered in the world, and that sometimes, when you least expect it, a hero in a pilot's uniform will remind everyone around them what true leadership looks like. The incident on Flight 8047 became a powerful reminder that we should never judge people by their appearance, their age, or our assumptions about their circumstances. It showed that respect is not earned by wealth or status, but by character and service. And it proved that somewhere above the clouds, flying at 35,000 feet, a veteran pilot understood that honoring those who served is not just a duty, it's a privilege that defines who we are as a people. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with courage, integrity, and the simple recognition that every person deserves to be treated with dignity. On Flight 8047, Captain Rodriguez won such a battle, and in doing so, he honored not just one elderly veteran, but the principle that respect should never be rationed based on appearance or assumptions. Harold Thompson's story reminds us all that heroes come in many forms, and that standing up for what's right, whether you're 82 or 42, is always worth the effort. In the end, the first-class seat was just a place to sit, but the first-class treatment from Captain Rodriguez was a gift that would last Harold Thompson for the rest of his life.